You're about to enter a new dimension where boundaries of life sciences, data, and technology blur, and AI reshapes what's possible. Welcome to the Improzone, powered by Improzo. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Improzone, where we talk about what's really happening at the intersection of life sciences and AI. I am Jane Urban, your host and Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Improzo. And what's really fun about today is my colleague, Jason Harlander, is going to join us, and I'll let him introduce himself in a second. We're going to be doing a 3-part series here, which is a little different. First, we're going to talk about the past or where CRM came from. Then we'll talk a little bit about present state today with CRM, and then obviously good idea to move on to the future of CRM. So with that, I am so excited to bring Jason to the Improzone. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Jane. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well,
yeah.
Go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit.
I'm the Executive Director of Technology Management here at Improzo. I've got an interesting background. I've been in the space for 15 plus years now, but my claim to fame is I was a very early Veeva employee. So I was with Veeva when, I think I was employee number 33, somewhere around there. So very early days with Veeva when the landscape was shifting around CRM. So very excited to chat about this topic. I've got a lot of history on it. So very excited to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. And I always joke, I feel like you've probably forgotten more than most people know about CRM. It's this very deep understanding of this customer relationship management software and the way that it came to be. And so that's why I thought it would be really great to pick your brain a little bit today and understand a bit of why we are the way we are today. So the first thing is just there's this component of the origin story of these pieces of software that we know and love today. Like Salesforce, especially, which has become a main player now, they didn't start out as a pharma CRM, right? They've done a lot of other things before that. What's the origins of the Salesforce world being a CRM tool in the first place?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So, Salesforce was founded, way back in 1999, year that I graduated from high school, actually. So it was started by, former Oracle executive. Everybody's probably heard the name Mark Benioff, but he started it as a software as a service company. And if you remember back, if you ever saw the old adverts for Salesforce, their big mission statement was the end of software. And they had the ad with the red circle crossed through it on software. And it was really, they were really attacking the dominant model of the era. So if you were working back in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of companies had to install and maintain all of their software on premise, right? So you had your big server rooms, your server racks, big IT teams that would manage all that. And that's really important context for where life sciences was at the time, right? Salesforce founded this cloud-based CRM. It was broadly dismissed by the industry, really pushed that it was more suited for startups, but not enterprise level. But Salesforce really came in and built this infrastructure, right? They wanted every industry to use it. So Salesforce went really broad when they started. And in the mid 2000s, I think around 2005, they launched what was called App Exchange, right? And that was pioneering that enterprise application kind of marketplace. And then a few years later, Force.com arrived. And that was, I think in 2008, it was really a metadata-driven platform for custom applications. And that was really the shift, right? It went from this product to a platform. And that is what made the life sciences vertical play possible later. So Salesforce wasn't trying to be a pharma company, but it was really building the foundation and the rails to build something bigger.
Right. And they were competing. There was Siebel Systems. There were a few other players that.
Well, even Oracle. They were competing.
Oracle itself, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that premise was really different. And I think to your point, initially, as many new things are seen as only for small companies or only for startups. So it's interesting. And then the thing that I think people don't understand is also that Veeva is newer, right, than Salesforce. Correct. And so how did Veeva enter the picture? Since you were employee number 33, you probably have a good sense of that.
Yeah, so Veeva's an interesting one, right? Veeva was founded by Peter Gassner, but Peter spent 2 years at Salesforce, and he was the senior vice president of technology, and he actually helped build the platform, and he helped design the App Exchange, and that's the very marketplace that let developers start building apps on top of Salesforce infrastructure. And he was one of the architects of that whole ecosystem that started making Salesforce this really fast growing enterprise software company. He founded Veeva in 2007. And he founded it along with a couple of other people, Matt Wallach, Doug Osler, and they wanted to stick on a vertical and build a cloud software, but tailor it specifically to the life sciences industry, which, as we know, it's very strict on the regulatory side, on the data integrity side, on the specific workflows that they need. So they really saw this niche where it was maybe not getting the
The
not
love,
getting
I guess.
the love they needed
Yeah,
from players. The founding team really recognized that generic enterprise software that's this one size fits all really couldn't satisfy pharma compliance and even beyond that content management needs, right? So they launched Salesforce on force.com. And that really gave them a quick entry into the market because the platform was already there with force.com, right? They had a base platform to work with, so they didn't have to
right.
build a platform from scratch to start. So that logic around that was both strategic and practical, right? So force.com, which Peter had helped build, could get them to market faster. Matt Wallach brought in the life sciences domain knowledge and he understood where in the market who could be an early adopter. And then being on Salesforce instantly gave Veeva like enterprise credibility, right? So they
Right.
had secure infrastructure from day one. And then Salesforce got something out of this too, though. They got revenue and entry into a sector that it really wasn't looking to specialize in. So
Right.
it was a good marriage at the beginning, right? I remember when I started, a lot of people had said that focusing on one vertical in the cloud, it's a wrong strategy. Building on somebody else's platform was even more crazy.
Right.
But,
There's always a risk inherently, right? And that's
right.
foreshadowing.
The crazy thing about Viva is I think by 2012, so we're talking what, 5 years after they became a company, they had captured over 80% of the market share
It's
in
incredible.
pharma CRM for a company that's only 5 years old. You'll hear stories about Veeva where they're talked about as a unicorn, right? So Veeva took very little funding. They had seed funding and that was it. And then they went IPO and went public. And that is rare for a startup, right? So,
Yeah, to have no
um,
series raises
right.
between.
Those
That's
series raises. Yeah.
wow. Yeah. And you were when you joined, they hadn't gone IPO yet, right?
They
They
had
were
not gone
still
IPO yet. So I joined in 2009. So about 18 months after they had started as a company. They had not gone IPO. They only had, their one product, the CRM product on force.com. And they had just landed Pfizer, right? That was the big account I came on and worked on.
right.
So
The first kind of
um,
mover, which is it's a pretty good place to start. Did
it
you like
is.
what drew you to want to work there in the first place, Jason? Like
Yeah.
obviously this was
So
pretty risky at the time.
it was risky. Again, I had worked at Day Labs, which is my entry into the pharma space. And I dealt with our sales force there and I saw the struggles they went through. So when somebody else that I had worked with at Day moved to Veeva and told me about the opportunity, I just got excited, right? I was younger and I thought working for the startup that's maybe trying to do something different could be great. And it ended up being great.
What do you think they got right? Like what were some of the things that were early choices that you saw have growth ripple effect both in culture and I guess financial success as well?
Yeah, so I think what Viva did right is they were really hyper focused, right? And one of their values that I always went back to that Viva had was do the right thing. And that really echoed through the company on making sure that when every department across the company, we were focusing on doing the right thing, whether it was in development or support or services or whatnot, that was the focus. And Viva really understood something that every generic CRM vendor missed, right? So life sciences at its core isn't just another sales organization, right? And I think that's what was missed by some of the bigger players and allowed Veeva to capture as much market share as they did, right? So life sciences
Yeah.
sales staff, like I said earlier, they faced higher levels of regulation. They worked on very different timelines. Jane, you've been in this industry. There's very different jargon that
This
every
is true.
company seems to have their own.
Yeah.
And pharma in itself, they were involved in different events and communities. So in many ways, I feel like the pharma industry is its own universe, right? That's created by those regulations and really just the unique nature of the work that we're in, right?
It's also a group of people that are certainly, I think, passionate about healthcare. You don't, I think people maybe have the wrong impression sometimes on
Correct.
the outside of pharma. These are people that oftentimes have a personal story or connection to healthcare that drove them to
Yeah.
want to work in the space. And also, I think the customer relationship piece is so, so critical to a pharma company's success or failure. So it's very telling that they were able to, first off, to convince a bigger and still the biggest pharma company, Pfizer, to take some risk and partner with them. And I think that I have to believe part of that was also where the it's interesting. Pharma is very also, is anyone else doing this? There's a lot of
Right.
wanting to have peers. You don't want to jump in all by yourself. And then
Right.
once several people jump in, then more and more people are interested,
Right.
I
It's
think.
really,
And that,
really a domino effect. And I think
yeah,
that's
so that
like what
was
happened
why
with
they grew
Viva,
so
right?
fast too,
Yeah.
I'm guessing. And so there's this amazing story, and I think a lot of really positive energy that came into the origins of Viva. But then this is foreshadowing, but I hate to ask, like at some point, obviously this relationship soured a bit, and that's like the rift, the divorce, the split, whatever
Correct.
terminology you want to use
Yeah.
between Viva and Salesforce. And obviously things got a lot more complicated. So what
Sure.
happened there? What's your take? And I know we can obviously have lots of opinions on this, but I'm curious, since you
Sure.
worked with the Viva team early before this happened, and you had left by the time the split
I
occurred, right? So
had,
you
yeah,
weren't
I
there anymore.
left. Yeah, I left after about 10 years. So I left in 2019, but I really think the writing was always there in a little way, right? Because in early 2011, Viva launched Vault, right? Viva Vault, their content management system for life sciences industry. And Viva built that product themselves. It wasn't on force.com, right? They had their own product. And Vault really gave them another foray into pharma that was a need, right? So they had tools to manage documents, workflows. They got into like clinical trial data, regulatory submissions, quality process. Like they really expanded from being just on the commercial side of things to like the whole pharma ecosystem.
Right.
I
And I
feel
think
like
what's
that.
telling to me on that one, just to jump in, is
No, you're good.
I was on the commercial side for all of my roles over the last 20 years or so in pharma. And so I always thought of Viva as like a CRM company because
Right.
that was the main use case that I had
Correct.
for it. I touched Vault a little because we would manage content there
Sure.
sometimes, but for the most part, it was a CRM. And then when I started working with medical teams and folks in the regulatory side of the house more later in my career, they were all like, I don't, it does CRM. I didn't even know that. Like they just had, they had the Vault product was really the product that they
Yeah.
knew Viva for. And so to your point, once that became part of their offering, it really changed. It entered a new realm for pharma. And it almost, if anything, I think maybe people on the commercial side don't appreciate the degree to which Vault is such a unique and really wonderful solution
Right.
for so many different problems on the R&D side, since they're often very siloed between the two.
Well, I feel like that move really proved the transformation at Viva, right? I feel
Yeah.
like now Viva was diversified and they could move away from Salesforce infrastructure. And it really gave them like the ownership of their own platform, not just an application that they have with CRM. So to move back to your question, like that formal announcement of the split, that came in end of 2022, right? It was on an earnings call that Viva announced and wouldn't renew their partnership. And that partnership expired in September of last year in 2025. And Viva had announced that they were going to move their Viva CRM to the Vault platform. And they announced to the industry that there would be a 5-year kind of period where existing customers could continue using Viva CRM on force.com on Salesforce through September of, I believe, 2030.
Sounds right. Yeah.
But like I said, I think there was always the writing on the wall. And I think there was a tension that had been growing between the two of them through the years, right? So because the partnership that they had, it really had constraints on both sides for both companies, right? So on one side, it really controlled Viva's ability to grow. And then there were some core issues, right? There were service outages that Salesforce would have, and then that could create customer experience problems. And with Viva not owning that, like they're beholden to what happens at Salesforce, right? So Viva was also had some geographic dependencies from Salesforce for the markets where it could sell CRM. And they were also restricted from expanding into different domain areas in CRM. Salesforce kind of held the controlling position there.
Yeah.
And then there was also a piece that I don't think it's talked about a lot, but there was a royalty structure really. By getting off of force.com, Viva didn't have to pay Salesforce a royalty on by using their own platform, right? And they could enter new product categories. Salesforce does marketing automation, right? Customer support. Viva couldn't touch those, right? So
Yeah. That's
um,
true.
and I think I read somewhere when I was doing my research for the podcast that Some analysts estimated that just those two categories alone were like an $800 million opportunity, right? So
Wow. Yeah.
we haven't heard that Viva's moving into that, but by breaking the partnership, it opened up a lot of doors for them.
Yeah.
So all those non-compete protections that really kept Salesforce out of pharma CRM, though, this is the other side of coin,
Yeah.
that expired with it. So you'll see in the industry that Salesforce moved really quickly after that announcement. I think in April of 2024, it announced like an alliance with IQVIA and licensed IQVIA's OCE platform to Salesforce. And then IQVIA also helped on life sciences cloud development. And I think another smart play that Salesforce did is they actually pulled some pretty heavyweight veterans from Veeva, right, onto the team that's building life sciences cloud. So they have
Yeah.
some credibility already. Like Frank DeFesh moved over. So there are some heavyweights that moved over to build up life sciences cloud. And now it's generally available, right? It became available end of last year. And so Salesforce is now positioning itself as like the single end-to-end life sciences engagement platform. So clients who stay on the Salesforce-based Veeva CRM, like I said, they can use it till 2030, but they're not getting updates. So that is
Right.
also pushing the IT leaders, pharma leaders to really make a decision, right? Because while they can keep using Veeva's platform, they're not going to get any of the new AI features. They're not going to get
Right.
any of the new platform features. So it's a very hard deadline for pharma leaders and commercial ops. And it's not a soft transition. You've got to go somewhere, right?
Right.
Like,
You can't
like
stay. You
you
don't have to
can't
go home,
stay.
but you can't stay here.
Right.
And
Exactly.
I guess, and that happened in 25, right? So we're already in the phase where if you're on the original force.com version of
Correct.
Viva, you're not getting any of the benefits of whatever Viva cooks up now because it's
Right.
not coming with. And so that inherently pushes every time some new feature comes out, you have that FOMO of I can't use that yet. It is, and or I want to get to a modern, stable place where things are going to look and feel and work moving forward. So it's a really important moment in the industry. And I guess one
It
thing
is.
I had this impression as an outsider coming in from the pharma industry side that it was a little bit personal, right? There was an element of human here that
I
people
think
didn't
so.
get along or they were frustrated. And so there's this element of, in some ways, frustration, I think, across multiple fronts. And actually, the pharma industry is not super happy about it either, because now you have to make a change. It's going to cost money to make that change, no matter what you decide to do. It's going to require development and
Yeah.
transition, and there's a change management sort of tax to it. So it's definitely like important to understand the foundations of where we came from in terms of why
Yeah.
we are the way we are today. But I think it's also important to think about the repercussions this has on a full industry to have to make
Right.
decisions and change course. There's so few companies that aren't somehow touched by this because almost all of them are either using Viva or some version of Salesforce. There's a tiny niche of other things, but
There
that's
are.
that's the bulk of what people are contending with. So this has been a fabulous history lesson, and I hope folks stay tuned because we're going to go on to talk about the present day of the Salesforce Viva transitions that need to happen for people and talk a little bit about how to think about that. And then we'll go on to talk about what the future holds. So again, thank you, Jason, for this history lesson. It's been super helpful. And I think what we work on at Improzo, it is in this figuring out how to think through this. So we want to definitely have people stay tuned and hear more about how we've been contending with this breakup, this split. So let's wrap it up there, and then we'll see you in the next episode talking about the current state. Thanks again.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks, Jane. This is honestly what I love talking about because I think when companies skip the history, they end up making decisions based on a brochure instead of what's grounded in reality. And in Prozo, a lot of what we're doing is sitting at this intersection, like understanding not just the tools, but the philosophy. So the context of what makes a CRM engagement actually go well. I'm looking forward to the next episode. So thanks.
Me too. We'll talk to you hopefully very soon. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.
This has been the Improzone, improving life, empowering customers. Follow us and stay tuned for what's next.